Wait, hold up. You telling me they got Bill as the 5th string running back? Then they got Jalen Lane as the backup punt returner and KJ Osborne as the starter?
What the hell? What the hell?
So the Washington Commanders just released their first unofficial depth chart of the season, and let's just say it's an interesting one. As I know it's unofficial, but I think it has some truth to it. Let's talk about it.
The way that we live is not for everybody.
Nah, that ain't it, y'all.
How do you think the rest of Jaden Daniels' career is going to go? If we're, 6, 7 games into Jaden Daniels' career and he's already milking injuries? Like,
stop saying my name, you dick riding bastard.
As I already said, ladies and gentlemen, I know this is an unofficial depth chart, but me, your man Juan Gotti, personally thinks there's some truth to these unofficial depth charts that they put out every year. So what I'm going to do is compare the unofficial first depth chart from last season's first preseason game versus the Jets, compare it to the official depth chart that we went into the regular season with, and then we're going to do this one this year, and we'll see exactly how it looks once we know we get down to the 53-man roster and the official depth chart, because again, I think there is some truth to it. So actually, let's first start by taking a look at last season's first unofficial depth chart, as you have Terry McLaurin, Dyami Brown, Bryson Tremaine, and Davion Davis as your receivers when the first unofficial depth chart came on. Man, Bryson Tremaine is a name that will live in my head forever, because I swear I thought he had some potential like no other with the the size length that he had. And Davion Davis was an interesting one, but was always a long shot. And then you go down to left tackle. Brandon Coleman was the first left tackle. It was Cornelius Lucas, and then it was Alex Akingblue. And again, how did it end up panning out when the official depth chart came out, right? It was Brandon Coleman out there at the starting left tackle position. And then it was obviously Cornelius Lucas backing him up. Then you go to the left guard position. It was Nick Algrady, it was Chris Paul, and it was Mason Brooks. And then again, how did the left guard position eventually pan out? Nick Algrady was eventually your starter, and Chris Paul was, a depth piece as well. Then you go to center. Tyler Biadasz, your newly acquisition from the Dallas Cowboys, free agent going into this season at this point. He was your starting center. Michael Dieter was your backup center. And look at that name right there. Ricky Stromberg was still around at the time. But Tyler Biadasz ended up being your starting center. And Lord knows Michael Dieter was the backup. And we clearly seen that, because we remember that Dallas game where he had to come in the Falcons game as well. But then you go down to right guard. It was Sam Cosmi, right, of course. And then it was Julian Good-Jones and Ricky Stromberg as your depth pieces. Then you go to right tackle. Your right tackle was Andrew Wiley. Of course, backing him up was Trent Scott. Then you had Braden Daniels, and you had David N. Now, again, focusing on the starter and the backup, Andrew Wiley, was your starter, and Trent Scott was your immediate backup. And how did that end up panning out, right? You had Trent Scott end up catching a touchdown pass in week 3, and he ended up having to come in and play some valuable snaps at the left tackle, right tackle position last year as well. So he immediately grew to be a key depth piece on this team last year. But you look at the common theme of the left tackle and the left guard, center, right guard, right tackle, and the just whole offensive line. It was literally that's how our starting offensive line looked for the most part last year. If I could, my memory serves me correctly, week 1, when we went to Tampa Bay, this was your starting core, your starting left tackle. And even going back to the wide receiver position for a second, it was Terry McLaurin clearly as your number 1. And then you had obviously the other side. It was a mixture of Noah Brown and Dyami Brown, because at this time you see Noah Brown wasn't even around. But you continue to go down to the tight end position, it's clear as day. It's exactly how it was last year when the official depth chart came out. It was Zach Ertz, it was John Bates, it was Ben Sinnott as your 3 starting tight ends, and then Cole Turner, Amani Rodgers, and Kosin Yankoff was still here. And the common thing about that is this is exactly, again, Zach Ertz was your starter, John Bates was your backup, and Ben Sinnott was your 3rd tight end all of last year. And you may be like, Juan, so what is your point with this again? My point is to kind of prove my theory that although these depth charts be unofficial, it has some truth to it. So I know it may get wild when we get to the updated one for the 2025 season, where it may have some guys out at certain positions, like a guy maybe 5th string, 4th string, where you're like, clearly he's 3rd or 2nd string. But for the most part, that's how they truly view these guys, right? So then you go down to the other wide receiver position. At this time, it was Olamide Zaccheaus. It was Luke McCaffrey, it was Kazmir Allen, and it was Byron Pringle. Remember, Byron Pringle ended up making the roster last year, but eventually we got Noah Brown, right? Because you trade Jahan Dotson away, who was under here as well. Jamison Crowder stayed around, and remember my guy Mitchell Tinsley, man. Oh my God, I had such high hopes for Mitchell Tinsley, but he ended up not panning out. And then Marcus Rosemary Jack Saint had a fan base in the fan base last year because of the build that he had and a crazy one-handed catch. But for the most part, the wide receiver position was a little bit different than what it was on the first unofficial depth chart headed into the Jets game, because again at some point you traded away Jahan Dotson, you got Noah Brown, you didn't have Mitchell Tinsley, so your wide receiver core ended up being Jamison Crowder, Terry McLaurin, Noah Brown, De'Ami Brown, and then it ended up being Byron Pringle, and if I didn't already mention Jamison Crowder, there was one more, Luke McCaffrey, if I didn't already mention his name. Those were your 6 receivers last year. So it was slightly different, but for the most part, it was early similar. And then you go to the running back position. Brian Robinson, Chris Rodriguez, Austin Eckler, and Jerry McNichols were your 4 backs. But the point is, and the key thing is, Brian Robinson was your running back 1. And who was your running back 1 last year? It was Brian Robinson. Your backup, Austin Eckler. Then it was Chris Rodriguez and Jeremy McNichols as your 2nd backs behind them, and that's exactly how it looked all of last year. It was Brian Robinson, Austin Eckler, and Jeremy McNichols. And then when Chris Rodriguez had to get called up, it was Chris Rodriguez. So again, that's how the offensive side of the ball looked for the unofficial depth chart headed into the Jets game. Looks very similar to the official depth chart, right? And we'll get to that because we're going to see exactly how the roster looked after they came out with their official 53, but it looks early similar to exactly how it looked last year. And then you go to the defensive side of the ball. Cleveland Ferrell was your first defensive end last year. It was then KJ Henry and Jalen Hurst and F.A. Obata, who was coming off of a broken leg. Those were your all of your defensive ends for the first side, for the left side. Then you had Deron Payne, John Ridgway, Vidarian Mathis, and Norland Powell, and Jonathan Allen, Jerzon Newton, and Hagee Chisholm, and Benny Poeteo as your other defensive tackles. But for the most part, it looks pretty real to the official one, because your starter 3D tackles were Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen. Your other edge was Cleveland Ferrell. Then your starting other edge was Dorrance Armstrong. Then behind him, it was Javonte Jean-Baptiste. And then Andre Jones was still around as well. Jerzon Newton was your backup defensive tackle behind Jonathan Allen. And then your starting outside linebacker was Dante Fowler, right? And then it was the other one was Frankie Louvu, of course. And then Bobby Wagner was in the middle behind Jordan McGee, right? Again, these positions, this is the unofficial one, right? Before the Jets game. But again, it looks pretty similar to how it looked officially once the roster came out. Obviously, Jamin Davis was gone, right? You know, Michael Walker, he played some valuable snaps late in the season and in the playoff game, which was crazy. But Jordan McGee, he went down, but he was your second backup, your backup linebacker. Anthony Pittman, he didn't even make it out of, I want to say, training camp. And then we cut him very soon. And then you go to your cornerbacks. It was Mikey Sammerstill, it was Noah Igbenogany, and it was Caillou Blue Kelly, right? Michael Sammerstill was your first outside corner at the time. And then it was Benjamin St. Juste, right? And then this was the crazy thing about it, because at the time when you did it in order, it was Mikey 1, Noah 2, Caillou Blue Kelly 3, Benjamin St. Juste 4, and then Emmanuel Forbes was your 5th cornerback at the time, and Chiggy Anusium was a guy that we were very high on and very interested in, but unfortunately he didn't, pan out to be anything. We paid all that money to him, and he didn't, pan out to be anything here in Washington at least. But your starting corners were ultimately what they end up being, right? It was Mikey Samuelsteele and it was Benjamin St. Juste as your outside corner, and Noah Igbenogany ended up being your slot. Manuel Forbes ended up getting released at some point, right? Michael Davis was trash last year, right? So that again is very similar to what it ended up being on the official roster. And then your strong safeties was Jeremy Chin, Derek Forrest, Dom Hampton. Then your free safety was Quan Martin, Jeremy Reeves, and Percy Butler, and Tyler Owens. Tyler Owens ended up making the roster as the undrafted free agent, but again, focusing on your starters and the positions of where everyone is at. It's exactly how it was at the end. Jeremy Chin was your starter. Quan Martin was your starter. Derek Forrest was your backup, right? Jeremy Reeves was the backup as well. Dom Hampton, Percy Butler, special teams guys, and Tyler Owens as well made the roster, and that's exactly how it looked last year on the official one. And then you go down to the specialists. Of course, this is not no shocker, but it was Tressway. At the time, it was Ramiz Ahmad that we got from the UFL and Riley Patterson. And then Tressway was your holder. Tyler Ott was your long snapper. And it was weird right here because Noah Igbenogany was your kick returner and Casimir Allen, but your punt returners were Jamison Crowder and Jahan Dotson. And of course, last but not least, for the 2024 unofficial depth chart, it was the quarterback position, the most important one. And at the time, headed into the Jets game, Jaden Daniels was your obvious starter, being the rookie. Marcus Mariota was your backup, and it was Jeff Driscoll and Sam Hartman as the finishing off the group. And remember, last year we thought Marcus Mariota wasn't going to make this team in terms of the second backup quarterback. We felt like should have been Jeff Driscoll, and he should have been 3, but clearly we were wrong about that. But Sam Hartman ended up being your 3rd quarterback, and that's who your quarterback room looks like now. Obviously added on Josh Johnson. But now let's take a look at the official 2024 Commanders roster. And let's see how similar it is to the unofficial for week 1 headed into the Jets preseason game. So your quarterbacks were Marcus Mariota, it was Jaden Daniels, and it was Jeff Driscoll. Those were your 3 at the time, and then Sam Hartman was hanging around for a little bit, but he didn't initially make the official roster. Then your running back position, it was Brian Robinson Jr., it was Austin Eckler, it was Jeremy McNichols. That's officially how it looked in the preseason one. Then your receivers, it was De'Ami Brown, it was Luke McCaffrey, it was Byron Pringle, it was Lamade Zaccheaus, it was Terry McLaurin, and it was Jamison Crowder. And at this point, it still didn't look like you had your guy Noah Brown around, but eventually he came along. But headed into the 2025 season, those were your receivers. Then your tight ends, it was Kosin Yankoff, it was Ben Sinnott, it was Zach Ertz, and it was John Bates. So we in fact kept 4 tight ends last year. So it'll be interesting if we do the same thing this year. But again, it doesn't look too different than the first unofficial depth chart when we headed into the Jets game. Then you go to the offensive line. It's Michael Dieter, it's Tyler Biotish, it's Nick Algreedy, it's Andrew Wiley, it's Trent Scott, Brandon Coleman, Chris Paul, Sam Cosmi, and Cornelius Lucas. And again, that's pretty spot on from how they ranked them and how they listed them on the first unofficial depth chart. And then going down to the defensive side of the ball, now you have Jamie Davis, who obviously we know wasn't around much longer after making the official roster, but he eventually did as a defensive end. But again, that didn't last. Javonte Jean-Baptiste. You had John Ridgeway, who got traded away. You had Dorrance Armstrong, Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, Jerzon Newton, Fedarian Mathis, and Cleveland Furrow. So for the most part, it is spot on, right? But of course, you don't have Jamie Davis up there. You don't have John Ridgeway up there. And obviously, you let go of Fedarian Mathis as well. So, but for the most part, outside of those 3 casualties, it's spot on to how it was on the first unofficial depth chart. And again, just a quick reminder for you, if you need to understand why we're doing this exercise, it's for me and my theory that although today's unofficial 2025 depth chart is out, it has some truth to it to me. I think this is how they feel that their players are ranked and where they're at. And I think that's how some of them will be, most of them I should say, will be once the official depth chart comes out. Because look at the similarity to the unofficial 2024 depth chart and the official 2024 depth chart as we're going through it right now in roster. So you go down to the linebacking room. It's Frankie Louvu, it's Dante Fowler, it's Michael Walker, it's Dom Hampton, and it's Bobby Wagner, right? Again, those is pretty much how it was for the most part last year. Jordan McGee, he did make the roster, but he was hurt, and that was a sign to tell, for the whole 2024 campaign, as it was injury riddled for him, but he has pretty crazy upside. Then you go to the cornerback position. It was Mikey Samerstill, or DBs in general. It was Mikey Samerstill, it was Jeremy Chin, it was Emmanuel Forbes Jr., it was Noah Igbenogany, Quan Martin, Derek Force, Michael Davis, Benjamin St. Juste, Percy Butler, Jeremy Reeves, and Tyler Owens. And those were your official DBs for the 2024 season once the official roster. And obviously, again, we know Emmanuel Forbes didn't last long, and we know a couple guys up here ended up getting benched like Michael Davis. But those, for the most part, were your cornerbacks, and it looked spot on, again, as it did heading into the Jets game week 1. And then you go to the special teams to close it off. It was Kate York at the time before we released him, because you remember we had to release him before week 2, or we weren't going to be able to get our 7th round pick back. It was Tressway and it was Tyler Otten. For obvious reasons, we know those weren't going to be any different. So that is the only one that's kind of like, duh, it's going to be the same. But for the rest of them, it's no really true difference in terms of order and 53 official guys that made the roster. So again, comparing the first unofficial depth chart from the Jets preseason game to the official 53-man roster in terms of the 53 guys that made it and the order, it's a very little difference if you ask me. Now this is where we get fun, because now we finally get to see the first official 2025 depth chart for the Washington Commanders, and we're going to see exactly how they put these guys out, because again, I personally think there is some truth to how these guys are listed in terms of starters, backups, and what may have you. So let's take a look at it. So first of all, with the wide receiver position, you have Terry McLaurin, who's clearly your first wide receiver, and then you have Michael Gallup, Chris Moore, and Michael Straction. And again, Michael Gallup is interesting that he's second behind Terry, because for the most part, again, I said it earlier in my video, I haven't heard really too much about Michael Gallup. I was a huge fan of the signing, and I'm a huge fan of him making this roster, but I just didn't hear much about him. I was, in fact, hearing more about Chris Moore's name, more so than Michael Gallup. So him being second behind Terry and not Chris Moore kind of just goes to show you that they may be leaning a little bit more towards Michael Gallup, given the fact that he had recent success and he may just be the better receiver. But Chris Moore, you don't want to count him out as well for making this group, because he is a savvy veteran that's been around for a long time. Then you go to the left tackle position. It's clearly Laramie Tunsil as your starting left tackle. And then it's Foster Sorrell, Tyree Phillips, and Lucas Niang. Now, Foster Sorrell is an interesting one, as he's a guy that we picked up when he was formerly played at the Chargers, and maybe he'll be your backup left tackle. And it's interesting if he can hold it down, if he'll end up being your second left tackle behind Laramie Tunsil. But I don't see it really changing, because I don't see Tyree Phillips or Lucas Niang being able to surpass Foster Sorrell. So again, I think that's pretty spot on to what it's officially going to look like. And then your starting left guard was Brandon Coleman, clearly, right? And Chris Paul's still around as he's your backup, and Julie Good-Jones is still around as well. But for the most part, again, that is how I expect it to look come week 1 or come official depth chart 53-man roster cut downs. And then you go to your center position, same as last year, Tyler Biadasz and it's Michael Dita as your two centers. Your right guard position, obviously, even though he's hurt, Sam Cosmi, Nick Algreedy, and Timothy McKay. Now, of course, with Sam Cosmi, it may be different because he's hurt, but we know if he was healthy and 100%, he would be your starting right guard. But it may be Nick Algreedy, and that's interesting because a lot of people were quick to put Nick Algreedy in the abyss, right? They said he was trash last year, and I said I think he's a serviceable starter in this league. I think you can hold it down with Nick Algreedy as your starting right or left guard, and he's second behind Sam Cosmi and probably will end up being your starter come week 1. Then you go to right tackle. This is the interesting one as well. This is probably the only position thus far that I can see being kind of false and kind of changing. But it says Andrew Wiley or Josh Connolly Jr. So we're kind of doing a little bit of Colts right move where they have it being Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones, but that just goes to show you that it's a true battle. It's a true battle, and I'm not surprised at all if that's how it is going in camp right now. Of course, you want Josh Connolly Jr. to be your starting right tackle because that's the first round draft pick that you chose, and of course you want him to get out there as soon as possible. But don't be surprised if Andrew Wiley's your starter. Why? Because he's a savvy veteran. He's been around for a couple years. He's a Super Bowl champion, and he was not as bad bad as people made him out to be. Last year, he was relatively good compared to his time with RB5. So maybe they do want to build up off of what he did last year and kind of work Josh Conley Jr. in. Or maybe, again, it's a true battle, and this is how it's looking in camp thus far. And they truly haven't made a true decision. And that could be 100% truth as well. Then you backing them up, it's obviously T. Scott, Trent Scott, one of the better backup depth right tackles, I should say, and then it's Bobby Hart. Then you go to the tight end position. It's Zach Ertz, it's Ben Sinnott, it's Cole Turner, it's John Bates, and it's Kosin Yankoff and Lawrence Kagger. Now, of course, Zach Ertz is your starter, right? It's not going to be nothing different than the official depth chart. Then it's Ben Sinnott as your backup, right? John Bates is going to be probably your third tight end in terms of listing, but second probably in terms of effectiveness if he can get his hands together and truly be dominant in that fashion, because we know how good he is as a blocking tight end, probably one of the best, if not the best in the game. And then you got Kosin Yankoff. Kosin Yankoff, in fact, made this roster last year as the fourth tight end. Maybe they keep 4 again, right? Maybe Cole Turner finally gets it together, and maybe he makes it over Kosin Yankoff. But I think this group truly loves Kosin Yankoff, hence to why he made the roster last year. And then you go to the other wide receiver position. So Terry McLaurin's clearly your X, right? And then you go to your Z spot, it's Noah Brown, and then backing him up, it's KJ Osborne. Then after him is Jacoby Jones, and then it's Braylon Sanders / Tamar. And then of course Noah Brown's making this roster, and that's no different than how I see it being on the official depth chart. And Deebo Samuel, Luke McCaffrey, Jalen Lane, Ja'Cory Brooks are all like your third / slot receivers. And for the most part, that's how I, in fact, seeing it playing out. I see Terry McLaurin being your X, Noah Brown being your Z, your slot being Deebo Samuel. Then behind those guys, that's when you bring in the Luke McCaffrey. That's when you bring in the Jalen Lanes and the Michael Gallups, right? You need multiple X receivers, and Michael Gallup has shown throughout his career that he can play that X or Z spot. So that's why I think he's secure, because if you think about it, there's no true Z spot or X spot behind Terry McLaurin, right? If Michael Gallup isn't making this roster, is it going to be Chris Moore as your backup X receiver? I don't think they feel comfortable with that. So your backup X receiver has to be Michael Gallup. So that's why, actually, now think about it, I think he's more comfortable or more solidified to make it this roster than I initially thought, given the fact that he's had a pretty quiet camp. Not really nothing to blow you away. But again, Terry McLaurin does not have no protection behind him, truly. And they are familiar with Michael Gallup. And he's a former 1,000-yard receiver. And again, I'm super high on him if he can stay healthy. But then you go down to, obviously, the quarterback position. It's Jaden Daniels, it's Marcus Mariota, and it's Josh Johnson and Sam Hartman. Now, it's going to be interesting to see if Sam Hartman can beat Josh Johnson out, the older veteran, for the third quarterback position. Do they want to ride with the OG, the older guy that's pretty much been around every team pretty much in both NFL, UFL, AAF? Like, he's played everything, right? So do they want to ride with this guy? Or do they want to ride with Sam Hartman, who is the young guy? And I think he's going to have the keys to the if Jaden got the keys to the Lambo, I'll say he has the keys to the Range Rover, right? You know what I mean? Because I think he's going to be the successor of Marcus Mariota at some point. If he has a good preseason, and if he can battle it out and beat Josh Johnson out, I think he'll be the successor of Marcus Mariota probably like next year. Because I think Marcus may end up going to another team. Maybe he retires. But I think the plan is for Sam Hartman to stick around and be your second quarterback at some point in the future. Then you go to the running back position. It's Brian Robinson. It's Austin Eckler. It's Jeremy McNichols. It's Chris Rodriguez Jr. It's Ja'Cory MERRITT. And then it's obviously Kazmir Allen and Demetrius Felton. Now, again, Brian Robinson is your starter. And that's how I see it being on the official depth chart when it comes out. I think Jeremy McNichols is higher than I think he will be. I think Ja'Cory MERRITT will be the third back behind Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler. And I think your fourth back will be Jeremy McNichols. And I think Chris Rodriguez will make the practice squad. Kazmir Allen and Demetrius Felton, they'll end up being cut and released, right? But for the most part, this is how I see it planning out, just moving up Ja'Cory MERRITT a couple spots. Then you go to the defensive side of the ball, and your defensive end, your first defensive end is Dietrich Wise, right? Your second defensive end after him is Cleveland Ferrell, and your third is Devontae Jean-Baptiste, and your fourth is Norrell Pollard. And this isn't a surprise to me. If Dietrich Wise is your starting defensive end, that's not surprising because he's the guy that has the size. He's a unit, right? And he's there to protect the outside in terms of the run game, not allowing Saquon and Bijan and all these guys, these great running backs that we're facing this year to hit the outside, right? Force them back in to the big guys like Javon Kinlaw, Deron Payne, right? And I mean, also still provides you with some type of rush aspect as well from the outside. And Cleveland Ferrell being your second guy, I think ultimately will be well. And I think it has some truth to it. But we'll see. And then Devontae Jean-Baptiste, third defensive end, the young fella coming off of his rookie season. We'll see if he goes up and learns from Von Miller and all these other veteran guys that he's surrounded with. Defensive tackle, clearly your starter being Deron Payne. Behind him, Eddie Goldman, Sheldon Day, and Ricky Baba. And Sheldon Day is an interesting name because I think he could potentially make this roster, especially over a guy like Carl Davis. But for the most part, it's Deron Payne, it's Eddie Goldman, it's Javon Kinlaw, and Jerzon Newton as your four defensive tackles. With the long shot of Sheldon Day making this roster, Carl Davis isn't making this roster. And the last guy isn't making this roster, VFJ. We'll just call him that. And then your other defensive end, it's Dorrance Armstrong, it's Jalen Holmes, and it's Andre Jones Jr. And again, that's really pretty similar to what I think it'll look like on the official depth chart. And then you go down to your outside linebackers. It's Von Miller, it's Jacob Martin, and it's TJM. And Von Miller coming in, immediately being your starter, shouldn't be a surprise. That doesn't mean that he's going to get 30 snaps and being your starter snap on every single down, right? He's going to still be your situational pass rusher on the third downs, on key passing downs as well. But he's probably listed as a starter because one, seniority, and one, he's freaking Von Miller, right? And of course, Frankie Louisville may be getting a lot of action as a pass rusher, but you're not going to list him as your outside linebacker, as you still need him to be the linebacker standing next to Bobby Wagner for the most part. Then you have Bobby Wagner, linebacker starter, obviously. Joe McGee as your second string, obviously. And Kay Madrano as your third string. Again, that's an obvious one. And then Frankie Louisville being your starting backer next to Bobby Wagner. And then it's Nick Ballore and Dom Hampton and Cam Arnold as your linebacking core. Now, again, it's pretty similar to how I expect it to look like on the official depth chart. Then you go down to the cornerback position. It's Marshawn Lattimore as your first boundary corner. Then after that is Bobby Price, Kayvon Seymour, and Alan George. Then after that is Trey Amos on the other side of your boundary corner. Then behind him is Jonathan Jones and Colin Vickers. And Colin Vickers is a name that I've been super high on this whole entire camp. As an undrafted free agent, I think he's had a stellar camp. Joe Witt Jr. spoke to him today and said he's looked really good. So I think he can truly make this roster and be another depth boundary corner for Marshawn Lattimore, Trey Amos, and Jonathan Jones. And if you really think about it, outside of Marshawn, Trey Amos, and Jonathan Jones, who else is going to make this roster in terms of the cornerback positions on the boundary, right? You probably going to keep maybe an extra one, maybe Kayvon Seymour, but he did get suspended last year, so I don't know if he's like truly back in terms of is he good enough to make this roster, or is that still affecting him? Doubt it. But Colin Vickers is a name that I'm high on, and I think he can make this roster alongside, obviously the slot is held down by Mikey and Noah. So you think Marshawn, Trey Amos, Jonathan Jones, Colin Vickers, Mikey Sarenstein, and Noah Igbenogany being your 6 cornerbacks if you in fact keep 6. Maybe you keep 5, but I think Colin Vickers is that last one. But again, the order that it's currently in, I think that's how it's going to be once we get to the official depth chart. And then your safety positions, it's Will Hurst. After Will Hurst, it's Percy Butler, it's Tyler Owens, and then Quan Mott as your free, Jeremy Reeves as your other free, and Ben Nickel and Robert McDaniel as your last free safeties. And again, Will Hurst being your starter, not surprised. That's how it's going to look on the official depth chart. Quan Mott, same here. Percy Butler being your immediate backup one. That's interesting. I feel like Tyler Owens will probably be that second one, but we'll see. Jeremy Reeves, obviously, that's a no-brainer. And the rest of these guys I don't think is making this roster. Ben Nickel or Robert McDaniel, so you keep them 4 safeties. And you go down to your punter kicker. That specialist it's obvious. It's going to be the same, so this is no-brainer. Tressway being your punter. Your kicker being Matt Gay, your holder being Tressway, and your long snapper again being Tyler Ott, and your kick returner being Austin Eckler, Luke McCaffrey, Demetrius Felton, and Kazmir Allen. And your punt returner being KJ Osborne, Jalen Lane, Demetrius Felton, and Kazmir Allen as well. Now, again, this is going to change. This, in my opinion, doesn't seem to be truthful and being official, but it wouldn't surprise me, especially with the kick return position. It wouldn't surprise me if they put Austin Eckler back out there. Do I want him back out there? No, because I think he's too valuable to his offense, and both of his concussions last year were due to his kick returning game, being on the special teams unit. So I think you should go with Luke McCaffrey. I felt like he was very solid as a kick returner last year, almost house one versus the Eagles. So I think your starter should be Luke McCaffrey, but that could be a true battle. And then your punt returner, KJ Osborne isn't your starting punt returner. It's clearly Jalen Lane, but they could be doing the thing as they always do with the rookies, making them earn it and not making them look like they're, the starter, right? Obviously, they did that with Jaden Daniels last year, so maybe that's what they're doing with Jalen Lane, and they're doing it with a guy like Bill, aka Jacory Carson-Murray. Now, of course, Trey Amos is different because, it's Trey Amos, right? He's a dog, and they think highly of him. But for the most part, I think this is how the roster is going to look come 53-man roster in the official depth chart, right? This is how I think it's going to look. And again, we went through both exercises of comparing the rosters from the first unofficial depth chart 2024 when we went to go play the Jets first preseason game compared to the official one, and it didn't look too different. And this is our first look at the 2025 unofficial depth chart before our first preseason game versus the Patriots. And I bet you that it won't look too different than what it did today. It won't look too different from what it will look once we get the official depth chart come after the 53-man roster and everything. So that being said, let me know what you guys think about this video down below in the comment section. As always, me and boy Juan Gotti. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, turn on post notifications. We're on the road to 11,000 subscribers, so we greatly appreciate if you reach that goal as soon as possible. Also, subscribe to 4th and 1 in the Burgundy Breakdown. Those links are down below in the description. Y'all have a blessed one. Stay safe, be easy out there. Peace.
Never gave up one. Ballin' like I'm Deshaun, throw the bomb, G. That's IG, my jersey never seen a line.